Well, welcome to Parallel Room 3. My name is Eric Llewellyn, and I'll be serving as the moderator for all the presentations here. Our first presenter for this parallel session is Dr. Bex Lewis, who just last week published a new book entitled Raising Children in a Digital Age, Enjoying the Best and Avoiding the Worst. She's been featured on BBC Radio 2, Steve Right and Home, and attracts a lot of attention from both the mainstream and church press. She's passionate about helping people to have a positive presence in the digital environment, where she has over 17 years of experience and is digital director of Fingerprint, a social media consultancy. Trained as a mass communications historian, her day job is director of the Big Bible Project at Durham University. And tomorrow, actually, she's kicking off the Big Read 14 for the 5th year, offering daily online reading and interaction with house group materials for Lent, actually starting tomorrow and then running through the week after Lent. So we are delighted to have Dr. Lewis here, and she's going to be The Digital Age, Photoshop Selves. So I'm going to turn it over to you right now, and if you have questions during the presentation, you can type them in the chat box, and we'll leave some time at the end for that discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so just a note that this presentation is kind of a very early dip into all of this. We're developing a bid for a data center for digital religion, and this is one of the ideas for one of the work programs that would sit on top of that data. So this is presented more as ideas in development rather than something that's yet been deeply researched. In academic terms, this can maybe be seen as a bit risky, but if you're working in the digital age, then it's great to open stuff up early on and encourage people to join in. So, are we in the digital age? My slides disappeared off from there. I'm just thinking, we've had the industrial age, and now people are calling this the digital age. Some of us are saying a digital age. And thinking about everything we do, whether we choose to actively engage with digital space, is affected by the digital, even if you don't want it to be. Every time you go through a bus pass, through a London Transport Underground slipper thing, what you're doing is going to be affected by that. And if you just look at the kind of statistics of who's online, billions and billions of people spending hours and hours and hours and hours online in all these different platforms. And these are kind of the most stable ones, I think, at the moment: Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google+, and LinkedIn, each serving a slightly different purpose, but with lots of possibility for engaging. The conventional wisdom about first impressions is that these are made within about 3 seconds, drawing on appearance, body language, and mannerisms. And those first encounters are quite hard to kick back in the future. We've heard all the stuff in the past about the classic idea that only 7% of what you say is down to the word, the rest is down to body language. I've heard someone say that actually the numbers are quite different, the words are actually hugely important still. So I had a look on Goodreads for some quotes about that kind of first impressions, and St. Jerome said, "Early impressions are hard to eradicate from the mind. When once wool has been dyed purple, who can restore it to its previous whiteness?" Then Richard Branson, that well-known person, said, "In the same way that I tend to make up my mind about people within 30 seconds of meeting them, I also make up my mind about whether a business proposal excites me within about 30 seconds of looking at it. I rely far more on my gut instinct than researching huge amounts of statistics." And then Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote The Tipping Point, wrote in Blink, "The answer is that we are not helpless in the face of our first impressions. They may bubble up from the unconscious, from behind a locked door inside of our brain, but just because something is outside of awareness doesn't mean it's outside of control." So there's a few conflicting ideas there, but still an idea that that first impression is really important. That first impression is now quite often happening online. People say, is that possible? Lots of people say, is that really a real relationship, a real friendship, a real meetup? Now, in page 40 of Raising Children in a Digital Age, I wrote, "So if we accept that using digital technology is important and can be beneficial to all of us, what else do we need to realise? One vital point is that we're talking about online, offline relationships rather than virtual, real relationships. as though they were completely different. In fact, relationships online may have a different nature, but they're as valid and real as offline relationships. Simply put, most people relate to each other in a variety of ways, face-to-face, by phone, via email, via Facebook, via text, and even on paper. Our relationships are not usually split into online and virtual relationships and offline and real relationships, and even those that are solely online are no less real than those conducted face-to-face. I think it's important to kind of bear that in mind. Oh, that's where that side, right. So I wanted to have a look at some of my selfies, or how I've represented myself online, and how I've tried. What are the first impressions people might get from these? So this particular picture is my Twitter avatar and my Facebook picture at the moment. So think about kind of what the first impressions might be from that. Well, I guess what I'm hoping for is that this will be taken as a digitally savvy person. I've taken a selfie and I've used Instagram. We'll come back to some of that. And I've taken it with a filter. The picture gives an idea that I'm an author. I've got a new book out, but hopefully not shoving it in your face too much, but it's the way that some people are coming to meet me, so it makes me very easy to identify. The smiley face is hopefully giving an idea that I'm friendly, approachable, and fits the tone of the book. Let's be excited and positive about the digital age. So that was one idea. This was a picture I used for a long time. I took it when the Keep Calm craze kicked off and people were quoting my PhD, which is where the whole backstory of that comes from, and consistently used it across many platforms, so it's really easy to find, and I still occasionally use it when it's particularly relevant to a story. And a lot of that is about trying to stake an academic claim whilst also appearing as relaxed and approachable. And then if you look at the header on my personal webpage, none of them are actually selfies and none of them particularly new, which probably says quite a lot about how I'm not doing so many adventuresome things at the moment. But there's a mix of pictures that I had in a makeover that I'd paid for, so definitely ones that seem to present the best of me. There's a whole load of travel photos highlighting that I've hiked up Machu Picchu, skydived and scuba dived, and then some classic Italy. Give me a real sense, I'm hoping, that I'm somebody who loves travel. And then a kind of casual out in the pub picture right next to my I have a PhD picture. And sort of those impressions that might give people. So if we now look at Sherry Turkle, who's one of the big people who writes in this kind of area, she refers very much to the idea of a Photoshop self that we produce online, and you can see I have thought about how I'm presenting myself online. A deliberately created self in which we share only those things that make us look good, part of a crowd, or that are easy to share, taking little time to think, is how she puts it. I'm not sure I only share things that are good about myself, but I won't share the absolute worst. I'm not sure that especially Twitter is a good place for that. Facebook maybe more, because it's got friends on it. But it's really thinking about, does it really take a little time to think about some of this stuff? Is it not, in fact, as I've hopefully demonstrated, a carefully thought through process? Although I would argue, as I wrote on a paper hopefully to be published for the European Conference on Social Media this summer, we have to argue, however, that we exhibit different social selves in different situations, and the online environment is simply another social situation in which we are learning what is appropriate to share. And what would be better reserved for a different social situation or a different technological medium, with questions as to whether the convergence of digital media is making it harder or easier to be digitally in disguise, and how easy it is to get our digital skin. So there is a whole lot of work put into achieving what we look like online. So Pete, who I work with, a really interesting observation that he put on a blog post for the Big Bible Project. A real sense, the sense that nowadays we always need to be improving ourselves, getting fitter, thinner, more skilled, less stressed. Society seems to have a compulsive need to see us constantly bettering ourselves. Someone argued that humanity has become nothing other than a resource to be updated. I wonder whether there's been a whole lot of that going on for quite a long time. And whether we might be in a position to want to challenge any of that. But as someone who's trained as a life coach in the past and has seen a range a huge range of self-help books over many years, is that actually something that's always been there? And the digital is maybe showing us a different way and highlighting some of the new things about ourselves. Or does it make it more obvious to ourselves? And can we kick back against any of that? If any of you did the 10-year anniversary videos from Facebook, they drew on an algorithmically generated series of status updates and photos. And lots of people said, oh, those are not my best photos. Those are not the ones I want highlighted as the best of my 10 years on Facebook. So Facebook has since offered the opportunity to edit those videos and remove the photos that are not so flattering for other ones. Again, if you look back over history, you can see there's differing opinions about what will make us look good. But that's kind of a whole different topic. But it does affect how we do this stuff differently. And then we can have consequences for this in our society. And this was a really recent report from the Renfrew Centre, which works with people, particularly people who are bulimic, I think, rather than anorexic, but both those kind of sides of scale. And we really feel pressurised to edit and alter our images so that we look like what we think of as our best selves instead of what we call our real selves. And then you kind of bring back in the debate about what is real. Is it possible to be 100% real? Are we always contextualised by something? And in this case, it's having a real consequence for society. Lots of people having body image problems, trying to sort them out in kind of the wrong way. So I belong to kind of a body image group, so I'm quite passionate about that. So what I was going to do then, because the audio doesn't run from here, is I give you 3 minutes to just watch this video. So if you just go to YouTube and watch this video, I will maybe run the video for those of you, so we've got a sense of timing. push that back out the way. So I think what was quite interesting in that video is we're looking back at a more traditional idea of what a Photoshop self is, which is how obviously the term emerged. And what I thought was particularly interesting was them looking at that and what was seen as normal, and then their reactions to what they looked like once they had been normalised. The idea that in making us all look like a kind of particular one-person ideal, we all look the same and therefore we're all losing our uniqueness. And what kind of message is that giving humanity? So I thought it was quite interesting from that perspective. And then go back to Susan Sontag, who is an American intellectual, or was, has been picked up as being desirable. She's talking in this case about a collection of images of early American women. So that was the common theme, but lots and lots of differences in those particular photos. And the idea is photography disclosing something particular about our world and therefore shaping our sense of what the world looks like, and hopefully the diversity of it. It says it's not to present ideals, which I think is a lot of the time what the magazines tend to do. And the idea of saying the camera shows us many worlds, and the point is that all images are valid, but we make choices every time we kind of upload something online. We make a real choice about which images are the ones that we want to show the rest of the world. So that reminded me sort of something that we looked at in a Media Lit course here. And if you think about the video, it's not all down to the retouching, but also before the retouching ever happens, you've changed the camera angle, the lighting, the clothes have been chosen to be flattering, and all those things are kind of pre-digital but have developed to become the norm. And we choose all those kind of things before we ever click a button on our digital cameras. We've become very used to photoshopped images, but there's a healthy debate we had about this image from Harry Potter films. If you look at the one on the right, Emma Watson has gained a little something around the bust area. And when we were asked about this image, we were all like, oh, that's disgraceful, they shouldn't do, you're over-sexualising children, all this kind of thing. And then as we picked the debate apart a bit more, I said, at what point do you say that's a bad thing? You know, should you not put makeup on because obviously that's enhancing yourself? Should you not worry about what you wear? If photoshopping's wrong, where is everything else? Oh, that's brilliant. Where is everything else? It's all visually enhancing what we look like and changing the impressions that people have of us. And if we think that this is already new stuff, if we look back to the Soviet years, I trained as a historian and I used to teach a module on visual history. And if you look back to the early days of this, it's obviously much easier with digital technology, but this was a picture that as Stalin fell out with all the people in the picture, they got erased from the pictures in one way or another, literally wiped out of history as they fell out of favour. And we can kind of rewrite our own stories online as we just choose which ones we're going to discard. So I sometimes put a less flattering one up just to give a sense of the whole picture. Is all photoshopping bad? This is clearly not a real image, but it's a wedding image that went viral. Is there a cut-off point between that being amusing and whether someone tries to pretend that's real? No easy answer, but I'm just kind of putting it out there. And then if we think this past year, the selfie was named Oxford Dictionary's Word of the Year last year. And this is where it sort of changed things. A lot of things that we've looked at in this presentation so far require decent software. Photoshop is expensive. But with our mobile technology everywhere, we can take lots and lots of selfies, and people do. Our tools have become smaller, cheaper, more portable, better quality. And unfortunately with lots of duck faces. If you've never seen a duck face, it's kind of like that. They've kind of become standard terms of our vocabulary, and even the Pope has featured in one, although we had a big debate about whether a selfie can only have one person in it, or as long as one person's holding the camera it's there for a selfie. He didn't take his own, he was taking in someone else's, but that was front page news that the church was seeing it as relevant to use this kind of material. Of course, there's lots and lots of advice about how to take a good photo for your selfie, for your image, portrait, whatever. And towards the bottom of this article, it suggests a couple of apps that you can use to improve your pictures. And it describes $5 as expensive for this kind of thing. So it's become very cheap to be able to just change your lighting, put a slightly nice filter on it, make it look just that little bit nicer. So kind of accompanying that, we've got the idea of the no filter as a really popular hashtag for images that are taken, particularly on Instagram, to say that the picture you're taking is less processed and much purer, and it's therefore seen as better. I started using Instagram properly last year, and the filter really can make a whole load of things look absolutely stunning, much better than in reality. I'm kind of thinking back to, as my PhD, we looked at the Cenopan pipe. I can't remember who did that, but there's a picture that says this is not a pipe because it's a depiction of a pipe. So everything we're doing is a depiction. But we're really thinking about, actually, is no filter better than something else? Or as this person's saying on their blog post, it's about the quality of the content in the image. It doesn't really matter. Because the filter, no filter, has become such a popular hashtag, there's lots and lots of people who misuse it, and therefore this site's been set up called Filter Fakers, which works out what filter people have used and said, caught you out, that's not no filter, that's not exactly what you look like. And this is a very popular site, so obviously there's some value people see in things truly being visible. And that kind of brings me to another one of my common sayings, which is just because you can doesn't mean you should. There's lots of things you can do online. Does that mean you do them all? So I then had a look about the idea of all these things we share. If we're only sharing very photoshopped aspects of our lives, do they then look super perfect? And then this I picked up from my book. Some teenagers will say, yes, that is it, but we know that, so people just have to get a grip on it. My life looks better on the internet than it does in real life. Everyone's life looks better on the internet than it does in real life. The internet is partial truths. We get to decide what people see and what they don't. And I'd agree with that, but I'd say we do that in a lot of spaces. When we go to the supermarket to buy something, we have a certain persona. We don't spill all our intimate secrets to the person at the till, hopefully, or the checkout. And it's just learning how we do that within the parameters of the online space. So yeah, what the little bit that it said in the book was a recent academic study concluded that witnessing friends' holidays, love lives and work successes on Facebook can lead to strong feelings of envy, leaving people feeling lonely, frustrated and angry. This can be particularly difficult for mums who think that everyone else is being super mum. Everyone seems to be having a better life. And then there was that quote. The American Academy of Pediatrics claims this can lead to clinical depression, but parents should not fear, as other research demonstrates that for most, Facebook and other social networking sites have the opposite effect of making users feel less depressed. Overall, teens report a high degree of well-being, and no difference was found between those who are heavy users of social networking sites and others. So bringing us back into the art side of it, this was the quote that was used in the abstract. If Christianity is really true, then it involves the whole man. I don't know what my computer's doing, sorry. Then it involves the whole man, including his intellect and creativeness. Christianity is not just dogmatically true or doctrinally true, rather it is true to what is there, true in the whole area of the whole life of all of man. He's talking about art, but I think we can apply this to our digital sharing. How can we share our whole lives authentically 24/7? Whilst remaining healthy, and what does that look like? If you've ever heard of the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, they're particularly concerned with 24/7 Christianity and removing the sacred secular divide. They're looking particularly within a work context and saying stand up for who you are and what you believe in every context, and don't say that being a minister is well above, being a cleaner. We're all kind of witnesses. So if we do that online, how do we share healthily online without shoving a constant diet of Bible verses at people that seem to have no connection to our personal lives? And maybe trying to make yourself look a bit more holy. How can you do that in a way that seems more personal and more related? And then thinking about with that, if we're created in God's own image, as it says in Genesis 1:27, how does that affect how we engage online? If we are supposed to look like God, and for some people maybe the only way they ever encounter God because they're not choosing to go to church or engage with that material because there's far too much other things for them to get interested in, how does that affect how we might see what we need to do as important or not? How can we use the power of the web to our own advantage, as Lizzie here did on this video? She's been described as the world's ugliest woman and came on and gave a talk, but it was before a TED talk. She did a kind of more low-key one, I think, responding to those who had bullied her on her appearance, and really tried to challenge what they were doing. So lots of people, when we talk about bullying and things like that, you kind of give up and think, oh, that's it, I can't control that. Actually, the same tools that allow people to be easier as bullies makes it easier for us to kick back. So kind of thinking about that and how you're going to project yourself online. What do you stand for? A lot of people worry about what they stand against. What do you stand for, and how might this affect the kind of things you say online to show the whole of yourself without oversharing or giving too much information? Can you be authentic and really be a consistent you? Particularly if you're trying to get a foothold in the media, are there certain things you can't share because it might affect whether you get picked for something? Is that okay, or do you say, well, I don't want to be involved in that kind of media? Transparency, a whole lot of thing about being honest. Where's the source? If you borrowed it from someone else's Facebook, hat tip them, mention them, say this is where I got it from, and then we can follow the trail back. Be aware of how you're coming across. It's not so much what you say, it's what people hear. So what is your tone of voice coming across to someone else? Integrity, take responsibility for your own content. If you make a mistake, apologise for it. Self-control, be aware of the consequences, kind of goes with the second one, particularly the next one, patience. Hold the trigger finger before you send. Have a little conversation in your head before you press send. Just because you can press send straight away doesn't mean you need to. Get rid of the kind of manipulative content. I'm sorry if any of you like the Jesus Daily page, but the kind of content that comes through there I find quite difficult to deal with. Share if you love Jesus, and all this kind of thing. And I'm like, just because I don't share it doesn't mean I love them any less. Don't manipulate people into feeling like they have to do that. Sort of root it in reality. And then a huge amount of kindness. How do we encourage others online? This is not all about us. This is how do we talk to other people and how do we do things differently. And having talked quite a lot about physical images in this presentation, it might feel slightly odd to end on values, but I think this is central to defining who we are in all contexts, whether online or offline. And as we reach an age where we wonder if the digital has become an extension of ourselves and the digital has made it possible to reach so-called perfection, which we've admitted changes over history, has it created increased dissatisfaction with who we are created to be? Or has it in fact given us an opportunity to stand up for who we are, to be ourselves, and to be countercultural? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Lewis. We're going to have some time now for questions. You should have the question bar there, so you can just type in your questions, and as you pose them, then I will enable your webcam and audio so that you can interact with Dr. Lewis directly. I can get us started, actually. I was interested that you brought up the Facebook 10 years video and sort of those compilations. We've been having this conversation a lot in my house lately because the choice of music for those videos made my wife cry, and I've talked to a number of others who also cried, and it's just sort of this, I'm assuming this one sort of track that is eliciting this emotional response and making people see the past 10 years in a certain light. And just sort of trying to connect this to some of the stuff that you've been talking about. The idea that the first quote where you said, you mentioned your colleague's quote saying, "Is humanity just a resource to be updated?" And then through the video also, you were talking about these women being photoshopped and presented as an ideal. And so I'm just wondering about the tension between trying to update yourself and present yourself as unique, or cast yourself in the best light possible, and if in doing so we're actually homogenizing ourselves, like try the tension between trying to put your best foot forward but then in doing so like everybody else or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, my cousin's actually an image consultant, and we've talked about this quite a lot. And she's a little bit wary about the being your best you. She says, it's slightly overused within image circles, but actually sort of quite a helpful idea. And it made a real connection when I went and did some social media training for them, and said, you're trying to get people to dress to make themselves the best you. And my cousin actually, when she did my wardrobe, she said, get rid of all those clothes that make you look like an office worker, because you're not an office worker, and you'll get more office work if you dress like that. So there is sort of conscious decisions you make in everything. And the number of workshops I've been on where they say dress for the position that you want to be. So that, I think that's been there for years. I think when it becomes problematic is if you only ever share the best stuff of yourself. I mean, I've just been at a day event about preaching, and there was kind of sense that came out in there that they were we actually looked at comedians and how they choose what they're going to talk about. And they've said the vulnerable truth stuff is the stuff that connects with people. And usually you're the one that's going to have to be the fool guy. And I think those are the best sermons I've ever seen, is when someone says, my life is not perfect, I'm going to show you the difficult bits of it. And so it's how do you do that in a particular way without totally infusing the rest of it, because I think the borders have kind of broken down. So although my Twitter feed is my personal Twitter feed, people also know that I work for Kodak, and so anything I put on there may affect decisions people are making about their engagement they want to have with Kodak. And that's what I thought would be really interesting to kind of take this into projects, is what kind of words are people sharing about themselves online. And if we get these supercomputers that can crunch masses of data, then we could see what are the words that appear over and over again in kind of social media, and how people are presenting themselves, and is that actually giving us any kind of healthy idea of how we are. And I think every time you decide how you're going to dress, even if you decide to go out, excluding people who have no money, but the rest of us make a decision every time we put a piece of clothing on, whether it's tracksuit bottoms or an Armani suit. You are making some kind of conscious decision. And I've got friends I know who work from home, but they get up and put a suit on and they work all day and then take the suit off when they've finished work. And again, that old adage about I'm working at home, don't think you can come and knock on the door because I'm not free to play with the kids, I am working. And you have to put a certain amount of that on Facebook as well, where people just want to have a chat because they can see you online. I use Facebook for work, so if I don't respond straight away, I think it's quite a balance that I'm not sure I found, and that's one I'm kind of interested in doing further. I mean, actually quite interesting if you look at the number of times I'm wobbling backwards and forwards just to turn this light on. You think, if I really want to present myself in the best light, that's not great. But even dealing with like whatever that error message was coming up, you just kind of deal with it and you go, okay, let's move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's great. We'll just leave maybe a couple more minutes if anybody thinks of a question that they want to ask. And in the meantime, I was wondering if you might just say a few words further about this project that's going to be beginning tomorrow. Running.
Yeah, so Big Read 14, the idea when we kicked it off was we wanted to get lots and lots of people engaging all at once online. Quite unusual, and we've done Tom Wright 2 years and Brian Williams. Maybe it's the 4th year of it, not the 5th. Maybe I can't count. But what we're doing this year, we've got Stephen Cherry's poems. He's a canon at Durham Cathedral, and he's been writing these poems for years. They're quite personal poems, but he's found as he shows them to other people, they've really resonated with other people and really made them think more deeply about the kind of topics he's been dealing with. So last year he decided to put them together for Lent under a series of themes. And we're going to be publishing those poems each day. We've got 56 different people to read them from all around the world. We just put a call out for people to do the audio recordings. Still chasing the last few. That's the joy of digital. Everything takes longer than you think. And then we're hoping that people will respond via tweets or blog comments or Facebook messages with things it makes them think of, photos that it particularly triggers them with, or links to a piece of artwork online. We're trying to encourage people to be ethically okay in how they share this kind of data. You know, does it make you think of a particular anecdote that might help other people? I'm no longer the presenter. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a real chance that we can do really interesting stuff, because I worry that we do a lot of stuff on our own, and actually there's a real chance for us to do things a little bit differently and talk to each other and share our perspectives rather than get stuck in our own little way of thinking. So people can join that on bigbible.org.uk and then just look for Big Read 14 or tweet #BigRead14 and look for it.
Great. We do have a question from Tim Hutchings, and I was fiddling around and was able to ask the question, which is why you lost status for a moment. But
okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead, Tim, and enable your audio, and then you can talk to Bex directly.
Okay.
Apparently I'm unmuted. Can you hear me, Bex?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, this is not the most high-end fancy computer, so if everything crashes, I apologise. I work with Bex in Durham, so this is the kind of discussion we can have endlessly in future and have had in the past. But you know, one of my interests is the idea of community, and people talk a lot about community as something that should be real. Can you find real community online, or is it only virtual community? And I know that's the sort of thing that irritates you as much as it irritates me. But this question of photoshopped selves, I think, ties into that maybe in an interesting way. We relate to people differently in lots of different spaces. So we have friends on Twitter, and we have friends on Facebook, and we talk to people differently in those spaces. I use Facebook for my personal friendships and Twitter for work, and you were saying you maybe use it the other way around, which is interesting.
I use both for both, I think.
And I'm always aware, if I'm talking on Facebook or Twitter, that I'm trying quite hard to present myself in a particular way. People will make fun of me because I write every status update 3 or 4 times and fiddle with the wording and try and get it exactly the way it should be. So, yes, fine, there's a kind of photoshopping of the self, and I'm trying to present myself in a particular way. And yes, of course, there are big discussions about how far is too far, what is a fake image versus a real photograph, or what's a fake annoying person who uses Facebook wrong versus an authentic person on Facebook. And authentic is as silly a word as real as far as I'm concerned. It just doesn't, But maybe a point where this becomes something you could research, I think, is how all of these online forms of community impact how people relate face-to-face and in other sectors. Maybe you could make a distinction, instead of between online and offline, you could make a distinction between private and public, perhaps, because I have friends who I will talk to personally, and it doesn't really matter to me if I'm talking to them on Facebook or face-to-face, but it makes a lot of difference to me whether I'm talking to those particular friends or just making a status update that everyone can see. So what you're saying about photoshopped selves, to me, suggests that what is private is more and more important, because those are the relationships that perhaps are real, are maybe less photoshopped, that we rely on somehow to survive a world in which we're always performing for these public audiences.
I was going to say, I've been talking to Benjamin.
See, for example, would be if we go into local churches, what kind of private communities and private relationships are people part of? has the photoshopping of selves in online spaces changed how people relate to each other directly? The reason I think of this, my PhD research, I was studying big American megachurches, among other things. And one of the stories I heard from that megachurch was that the youth group was having a lot of trouble because people insisted that they wanted to talk always online with everyone able to see them in public forums. And they didn't see any value anymore in talking privately with their youth group leader. They wanted everyone to see them performing their Christian faith all the time. Which is interesting. It would be interesting to look into that more, maybe. That's more of a long ramble about community, but find a question in there and answer it.
Well, the thing that really occurred to me is I've started talking to Benjamin Ellis a bit, who works in the real social media world, for want of a better way of putting it. And I've been noticing that people have been going more towards private means of communication. So the story we keep hearing is that kids aren't using Facebook as much. They're still using it as a workhorse, but they're not putting so much of themselves on there. And that kind of stuff is happening more on WhatsApp, Snapchat, and those kind of things, which are a person to person or person to a group of people, but they are not out in public. And there's been seen that there's quite a lot of desire for that with kids, because basically their whole life has gone online before they've had a chance to really live it, because it's what their parents have chosen to put about them online. So I think there's a huge number of things that we could do with this, and this was kind of a first stab at thinking how this kind of shaped out, and starting to think how that could turn into a project that you could use kind of big data, but maybe personalise it, like you said, in the kind of face-to-face meetings. Just trying to think where I want to take that next. Trying to think what your actual question was in there, like you said.
Tim, did you want to come back for any sort of follow-up, or?
No, that's a really interesting point that you make about the way we choose between different online spaces and WhatsApp and Snapchat becoming alternatives. I remember when Facebook was new and it was only for university students. There was a brief, wonderful moment before everyone else ruined it. And it was great that Facebook was a thing that university students used, and we could be very honest about our university experience, and we were photoshopping ourselves, obviously, but for a particular kind of audience. And then there was that horrible moment a year or two later when I remember one of my friends summoning all of her friends to the pub because she needed a drink to recover because her mother had joined Facebook and her life was over. And then since then there have been stories about people moving to Twitter instead, and then Twitter became a bit too popular and they moved to Snapchat instead, or WhatsApp, or whatever else. So there are some really interesting research questions, I think, there that could be explored about how people negotiate all of these different opportunities to present themselves, and what motivates people to choose one rather than another, maybe.
Yeah, and when does it become a mistake that you have to apologise for? You know, and all the old kind of power relations still coming in there. I mean, Pete Broadbent probably won't thank me for bringing this up again, but when he wrote something about, sorry, it's repeating on me, he wrote something about William and Kate's marriage, and put something about it would probably only last for 7 years. I think the crucial thing I remember him saying is that full sentence was, if the paparazzi hound them in the same way as they did Diana. But he was coming from a Republican perspective. He's quite anti-monarchist, so it's picked up in a certain way. And he was picked up because he was a bishop and because he was a sort of well-known figure and because he was a Republican. And that story just went kind of completely viral. And he says he now has to think, because to the rest of the world he is a bishop. It's not his entirely personal feed. So he has to think that everything he says has to go through that, and not all of it is suitable for public consumption. If you think that's some of the kind of biblical arguments about, or not arguments, commandments to speak with your brother before you take anything public. I think if we look at some of the Christian conversations online, people have totally forgotten that bit of it, and that actually a face-to-face conversation might clear the air in a way that digital communication maybe doesn't. And I think that's my whole thing, is online relationships are real. They're not the same as offline. Each of these spaces has a different benefit or drawback. Affordances and constraints, I think, is the official term I was trying to think of from the academic literature. They let us do some things and not do other things. And they're not necessarily the platform for everything. So I think by default we have to Photoshop everything. It's just how the digital has made that particularly easy for people, and sort of made it harder for people to maybe see where the reality is. The lines kind of become a lot more blurred.
Well, that's great. We're right up at the end of our time here. I just want to thank Dr. Lewis again for taking the time and coming and sharing this presentation, being a part of the conference. We have an hour-long break actually right now, and then are coming back with a presentation from Dr. William Struthers. So thank you again, and we'll see you back hopefully in one of these rooms sometime soon. Thank you.